Alright, welcome back. So usually what we do is we start off with day 1, which is our keyframes and our in-betweens. Day 2, which we do our timing and spacing, and finishing up any breakdowns. And then on our last day, we do all of our cleanup and make sure everything looks nice. So we managed to finish off our day 1 really nicely. What I did realize though is that on day 2 here, we need to actually do a breakdown, which is the follow-through. So when we're doing this kicking animation, right, like if you're standing there and you do a kick, your body kind of settles a little bit afterwards. And now normally when you do a kick, you kick and then your leg just comes right back down. I'm actually going to hold the kicking motion a little bit. I just feel like it's a little bit more comedic if he goes for a swish and then just kind of chills there for a bit. However, so in order to do that, I need to have the just one frame where he sort of collapses in on himself. The leg goes up a little bit. The left arm sort of collapses in on the body, so that twist is just shown just a little bit here. So now that we have that great follow-through frame, I stuck it in and started working on the timing, and it actually blew my mind. Like, the timing that I had created just with the 3 key poses and the 2 in-betweens, with a little bit of pause, a little bit of hesitation in the middle when he has that wind up, just because, again, I think that's cute. It was perfect the first time around, which was super validating, honestly. I did nothing that I'd be able to pull that off, and that would be so smooth. However, I did come into a little bit of a hitch because the leg, it just felt weird that like his whole body was crunching in on itself when he's doing the follow through. So I tried it where instead it was just his leg moving, copy pasting the frames around a little bit, so that way the follow through was just, his body stays stationary and his leg sort of goes up. And that felt even weirder because it was like his body's a mechanical lever. He just assumes the position and then his leg moves. So I decided that even though the full body contortion, it wasn't perfect, it was certainly a lot more natural. So now that we have all of our frames taken care of, we can get to the fun stuff, which is trying to figure out the arc of the ball as it bounces off the wall, etc. How fast the ball is moving because of the kick, all that nitty-gritty stuff. Of course, now we have to make a wall layer, and I was thinking whether or not I wanted to make a wall and a floor layer, but considering that I already have this really nice box that's just sort of stuck in the frame that comes with the file when I make it, I just decided to move them over and use that. So then, of course, we get into the problem that I was having before, which is why it is that I didn't draw the ball when I made the keyframes initially, much like I was drawing the tassels when I was drawing the flower sack's body initially, and then realized, okay, I actually don't know how fast everything's going to be moving, so I can't really justify drawing the tassels at angles, because I just don't know what those angles are going to be. Now I have to flip through this over and over again, whether it be in real time or scrolling, etc., to get a feel for how fast it feels like the leg is moving, and then doing like mental trigonometrical calculations in order to figure out, okay, where is the ball likely to be based off of that amount of kick. Admittedly, I probably could have gone outside and kicked a ball and recorded myself, much like I was doing one of my brick falls, but I feel like I could get a rough estimation the first go round, and then it would just become a matter of moving the ball around and getting a feel for it. So for those of you who are familiar with the channel, you might recognize this ball bounce because this is the same ball bouncing off the wall that I did with the ball bouncing across the floor animation, which I think was like exercise 2 or 3 maybe? Yeah, something like that. And there's a couple of nifty little tricks that I picked up from that. For starters, I realized that when the ball bounces before it hits the wall and then bounces off of the wall, that breaks down the arc into quarters, because a ball bouncing off of the floor to its peak is going to be the first half of the arc, and falling from its peak to the ground is going to be the second half of the arc. But if the ball bounces off of the wall in the middle of that, that creates one of those halves, splits that in half, and that change in direction affects how much energy the ball has. So normally, if the ball was just bouncing across the floor without being interrupted, it would have a predictable loss of energy and loss of arc as it goes. However, because it bounces off the wall, that second half of that arc is actually going to be cut a little bit shorter than otherwise. So this is where things start to get a little bit interesting for me, because all of the arcs that I've had to do up until now were in a vacuum. They didn't have an instigating force like a person or a flower sack kicking them. So my ball could drop and be 9 frames the first arc, 7 the second, 5 the third, etc. I didn't have to worry about any of these other variables. But now that I have these variables to worry about, like the ball bouncing off the wall, which I've done before, but also the kick, and the amount of force that the kick applies is going to be much more sudden than, for example, when the ball was rolling off the shelf before. So the amount of frames that the ball travels, the amount of distance that the ball travels in each of these frames, really, it all comes down to I just kind of make it all up as I go along. But I do try to follow the logic that the amount of distance that the ball is going to travel, like for right here, is that he's off of the kick, it's going to be really fast, so I don't need many balls in those immediate frames. But then as it comes back off of the kick and falls down after the first arc, then I need to have a couple more, so I end up favoring like 3 or 4 ball frames at the end of this first arc, while at the beginning there was only maybe 1, which I only figured out by rolling over the frames over and over again to see, okay, it feels right that the ball is really fast coming out of the kick, and then slows down in the air a little bit, then picks up speed again as it falls. By the way, just a quick aside to a point that I made earlier, you can see here that now I'm starting to do those halfway marks for the ball rolling, because I've done so much spacing out of the ball from all the other bounces and arcs that I have much less room that I need to work with, much less ground that I need to cover with this ball rolling. So instead of having to worry about thirds or quarters or whatever the distance is, the ball stops rolling, or the ball stops bouncing at a really convenient time. And then I can just do nice even halves as it slowly rolls back to its starting position. So honestly, a lot of the times when I felt like the arc was too fast, was too slow, or it felt like it was going too far, or wasn't going far enough, the problem was really just 1 frame difference. This whole animation is so concise that 1 frame really does change everything. So sometimes I think, okay, I need the ball to bounce. It's got too much hang time. So what if I just remove this 1 frame and rearrange these others a little bit to sort of cover the distance and even space out, go back, play it, that 1 frame made everything that I needed it to be. Realize I scared my ball spacing! That was probably a really weird thing to yell in the middle of a house with my parents. Anyways, now I can work on actually taking the ball from this, what did I call it? Practice layer? Planning layer. Yeah, so now what I can do is I can take the ball from the planning layer and just copy and paste it onto my final ball layer, change the color from red to black, and now I can start thinking about, okay, where is the ball in relation to the sack? Is it in front? Is it to the side of him? Is it behind him? It's never behind him. I don't know why I said that. And since I'm getting better at planning ahead, I put the ball layer on top of the sack layer, so that way I can go to the ball layer, use the paint bucket to fill in the ball white, so that way it still looks like an empty circle, but it also overlaps all of the lines from the layer below. So in case I want to make any adjustments in the future, I'm not messing with any of the lines of the flour sack, yet to the observer, it looks as though those lines were actually erased, because layers are cool! Thanks Photoshop and other editing software for that, because this is awesome. Now back to animation little tidbits, you'll see that I've spent this whole time adjusting the size and shape, well actually mostly just the squash and stretch of the ball itself. So as it gets kicked, it's going to squash on his foot, and then it's going to squash and stretch in a different direction while it's in midair, and then it's going to go back to neutral when it's at the top of the arc, and then it's going to stretch again when it's falling, and squash when it hits the ground. But however, after each arc, it's going to slightly squash and stretch a little bit less than it did the last time, and all of this is just a feeling. I'm just vibing it. Just trying to figure out, okay, so it's going to be slightly less that I go, but like the amount that is slightly less doesn't really matter because no one even knows what kind of ball it is, and no one's going to be like putting a ruler up to the screen. So I just need everything to be slightly less severe as we go along, at least until that way we get to right here where we're rolling back, and then I don't need to have any more squash and stretch. I just need to have the ball just shift. I mean, it's a sphere. Everyone just like assumes it's rolling. It just shifts back to the spot that it needs to land in. And then with a little bit of a paint job, done. I've Of course, now I have to go through the obligatory stare at the frames for long periods of time to figure out where exactly it is that I'm going with myself here. So just give me a bit, sort of figure it out in a second here. Great! So now all I have to do is make the return to neutral. What did I pull? Did I pull that out? No, I didn't. Great. I gotta make the return to neutral. And originally I'm thinking, okay, so the first keyframes each only needed to have one in between. So maybe I only need to make one in between this time as well. So now I'm trying to think, all right, so the leg is like hovering in this kicking position, so it should just swing back down to a start because I want to use this my same keyframe 1 as my ending position here. So I can just toss the keyframe 1 over to the end, and then I just have to make an in-between for transitioning to that part. And the leg just makes its way down nice and conveniently. But it's the left arm that's so weird because it's got this bulging out that it's doing here, but at the end it's just sort of like there, kind of attached to the side of the sack, which, you know, it looks perfectly sacky on the starting frame, on the keyframe 1. What's actually weird is the way that I've drawn the leaning forward of the left arm for the kick, the contortion, the stretching that he's got going on there. So my first shot in the dark at this is I can see that the point of the sack is facing towards the southwest? Yeah, it's the southwest, and then the neutral is pointing to the east, so I can make this arc with the direction that the tassels should be pointing in, and then use that and create a halfway point in that arc, and then have the point be there for then the frame in between. And I guess that's logical, like that's a halfway point, right? That's what I'm supposed to be making. So let's see how that comes out. And it ended up being way too choppy. So it must be the case that the distance that the flower sack travels between the kick frame and the neutral frame is similar in time to the distance and time traveled between the neutral and the wind-up and then the kick. So I am going to definitely need 5 frames in order to get back from the kick to our neutral position, which is ideally just as simple as making more in-betweens. Then with the rest of the body, with the right arm, with the left leg, those are of course easy, I can just do the math. With the right leg, it ends up being that I just have to eyeball exactly where it is that the leg is in its transition and just work on the perspective of the right leg. It gets wider as the perspective is closer to the camera, which is a little bit easy to fake it until I make it with a flower sack, but I am a little worried based off of my ability or complete lack thereof of drawing people for those types of angles, but of course that's a future problem. However, where things get really spicy is trying to figure out how to have those further in-betweens for this transition that the left arm makes as it goes from leaning forward and contorted around to back to its neutral, pretty much T-pose. And here we are with the day's work. gotta say, overall, I'm really happy with the direction that the ball went. It feels like it starts off really fast, goes and gets slower and faster as it's supposed to. The squash and sweat is really nice off of his foot. I'm really happy that I remembered to put the squash actually on the ball with the kick, so that's a nice touch. Overall, the roll comes out nicely. It bounces in a believable way as far as, animating on twos is concerned, and it lands right where I need it to. The overall kick motion, the first 5 frames that I had to make, great. I like the little contort that we've got on the head, that's all nice. But again, this is all stuff I talked about before. Today, however, there is something that I'm not satisfied with, and that's that return to form motion that I made before. I couldn't really put my finger on what was going on, but I can say that it feels as though he just goes from one animated pose and then just sort of auto defaults to another. You see this a lot in video games where a character is doing an animation that's programmed and then they get an input in order to do a different animation, and the game just does the math and just auto shifts all of the character's parts into the next animation in a way that's like kind of fluid, but it's obvious that that wasn't a pre-animated motion. That was the game just trying to do the math to compensate. And it feels like what I realized after staying up late because my brain wouldn't let me go to bed is that I didn't design the first frame in the intro with the outro in mind. So his neutral position was only designed so that way it would flow into the startup of the kick. It wasn't designed to be flowed into from the kick at the end. So I spent all the time making those frames sort of compensating awkwardly for that lack of preparation, and that's why I was having so many problems with morphing the left arm back. So I'm definitely going to want to have to work on that in the future, but overall I think I'm in a pretty good spot. So with that, thank you all very much, and you have yourselves a fantastic however long. Well, that's what I sound like without script and without splicing my voice. A little better than the last video, to be sure, but I still think it needs some work. Mostly just me getting comfortable with reading notes, though. So, please subscribe if you enjoyed Sack-a-roo and if he brought you some semblance of joy, and also check out Think Media, whose streams helped me mold a long-term plan for my channel, which I really needed for perspective.